hood, I think of a person, a place, and perhaps even a thing. I'm Sir Creepster, and welcome to Lunenburg County Ghost Stories from the Hood. Tonight's Tales of Terror come as a two-parter, with the first one being entitled The Pulpit. So sit back, relax, grab some snacks, and be entertained by yet another Lunenburg County ghost story from the hood. Although a lot of the stories that I share with you happen to seem to involve myself and several of my friends from the hood, there were also times in which my stories not only involved myself, but friends of mine that didn't grow up in the hood. I only knew these friends through school and sports. The stories that I'm about to share with you tonight happen to be just those that included these friends. Back during my junior year of school, myself and a few of my brothers from another mother thought of ourselves as real-life ghost chasers. How a black guy from the hood, who at the time wanted nothing to do with seeking out strange and unknown places, such as cursed cemeteries, haunted houses, buildings, etc., was chosen by this crew to be a part of it, is beyond me. The only rational reason that I can think of was that to them, I was this oversized, incredibly strong, and seemingly fearless kid from the hood. At least that's the conclusion that I personally have come to. One thing that I do know for sure is that whenever we're all together, I stuck out like a sore thumb. On the particular night of our ghost hunting adventures that I'm going to be telling about, everyone decided that we're all going to do a small sweep of the county, checking out a couple of places that had been rumored to be haunted. To be honest, I personally wasn't feeling this trip at all, but rather than appear to be weak, when asked if I was making the trip with them, I very hesitantly shook my head yes and said okay. The first part of this trip was to make a visit to Graham, Kentucky, which happened to be a small town located on the west side of the county, roughly about 11 or 12 miles away from our starting point of Central City. The spot that they all decided to go to was an old abandoned African American church that had been completely burned inside and was supposedly haunted by the souls of the congregation that had been killed in the fire during a revival the church was having. Upon arriving at the church, everything felt okay. The goosebumps that had covered my arms from hearing about the tragedy that happened at the church had pretty much gone away by the time we arrived at the spot. And I was ready to play my ghost chasing role with the rest of the crew. Once we got out of the car, we grabbed our flashlights, and we all immediately noticed that the outside of the church didn't appear to have suffered a lot of damage from the fire, and that it was miraculously still standing. Clarence then opened the door, and one by one we started entering into this burned up shell of a building. After we all made it safely inside, Clarence took it upon himself to head toward the badly burnt pulpit, go behind its ruins, and start having a makeshift sermon preaching to the three of us. I immediately felt in my gut that this wasn't a good idea, and that it probably wasn't going to end well at all. And boy, was I right. As Clarence proceeded to preach, a dark, eerie presence fell upon the eerily creepy church. And before I could say anything to Clarence, an unseen door that was located in the back of this small, dark church opened and shut so hard that it shook what little of the church was still left, causing an echo behind the force of the closing door that could be heard throughout the entire church. At that point, we all looked at one another in utter fear and disbelief and then struck out running towards the door in which we'd all entered through. I'm quite sure that had it been an Olympic race, I would have easily set a world record for the fastest time ever recorded. For my black tail was in the wind, passing up Ken and Jamie as if they were standing still. Once we had made it to the car safely, we could all still hear the opening and slamming of the doors inside. Clarence jumped into his driver's seat and yelled back at us, telling us to hurry up or he was going to leave us there. So we all quickly jumped into the car and away we went, leaving the church in a cloud of smoke. By now one can imagine that my heart was beating 100 miles a minute. As we all looked back and took one last look at the burnt church, all along trying to make sense of what had just happened. But then out of nowhere, Clarence shouted to us all and said, "Hey y'all, you know that we still have one more spot to hit before we call the night." Suddenly, there was an immediate sound of silence throughout the car. This told me all that I needed to know, which was that I wasn't the only one that wasn't looking forward to this trip, especially after we all had just went through. But like the first trip, we all sucked it up and said, "Let's go." The location of the final spot of the night was in a small town called Dunmore, Kentucky, at a place called Lake Malone. Lake Malone was about a 20-minute ride from where we were at the time. But immediately upon leaving Graham, strange things started to happen on the back road we were driving on, such as the car's headlights flickering on and off as if they was going to die. But the strangest thing being was what appeared to have been some kind of very large, unidentified animal came out of nowhere and leaped over the hood of Clarence's car with ease. This incident scared the holy crap out of all of us. But nonetheless, with the heart and spirit of true ghost chasers, we continued on our merry way. After arriving at Graham and then going to Lake Malone, we took a side road and drove for what seemed to be another 5 minutes or so. Then we finally reached a spot that one of my friends said there was a path that would take us to the haunted house. As we all exited the car, we took in a moment and took a deep breath before striking out in search of the supposed haunted house. We walked for about 5 minutes deep into the dark, foggy woods, but we still hadn't found the house. By now I was becoming pretty skeptical about whether or not there was ever a house to begin with, that it had only brought me out so deep into these woods knowing that I was one that had been scared the most from our early episode at the church. After walking for an additional 4 or 5 minutes, I had no choice but to call them out, telling them that there wasn't anything out here in these woods but mosquitoes and darkness. By now they had started knew for a fact that the house had to be out here somewhere, and that they were right in the spot, but just didn't understand why they hadn't found the house yet. After discussing this amongst themselves, they finally looked at me and told me that they didn't understand what was going on, and that they were all going to call the search off of the house tonight and try it again the next day. And that's exactly what we did. The next morning, my friends came back early and scooped me up, seeing that it was the weekend and we didn't have school. We arrived at Lake Malone around 10 a.m., assuring us that we had plenty of light to see where we're going once we got into the woods. The purpose of this trip, like I mentioned earlier, was to seek out and find the legendary haunted house. The backstory of this was that supposedly it was haunted by the spirit of a young man who had been kidnapped and then left in the house overnight tied to a chair. Upon returning to the house the next morning, the kidnapper supposedly found the young man in the chair in which he had left him, with his hair having turned solid white and his eyes bulged out of his head from apparently being scared to death by something. Once the authorities were notified about the body, they went there to only find that what had been a 17 or 18-year-old kid now looked as if he was 70 or 80 years old. judging from the texture of his skin. So with that being said, once we arrived at Lake Malone and had gotten our nerves up to go do this all over again, we slowly proceeded to take the same path that we had taken the night before. I instantly started thinking to myself, this was going to be yet another dry run. As we walked deeper into the woods, we came to a clearing that wasn't there the night before, or at least we didn't notice it if it was. After walking for about 5 minutes more or so, deeper into these woods, there it was, bigger than Dallas, right in front of our very eyes. An old 2-story home that appeared to have been vacant for quite a long time. My heart immediately started racing, the same way that it had the night before. For deep down inside, I knew what I was seeing couldn't be true. There was no way that we could have missed such a large object the night before, regardless of how dark it was in the woods. As we slowly started to approach the house, I overheard my friends daring one another to see which one of them had the nerve to enter into the house first. And it was obvious that none of them wanted to do so, or take that dare. They then turned and looked in my direction, but before they could say anything, I said it for them, telling them heck no, ain't no way my black tail is stepping foot inside a creepy old house. But I wasn't trying to be the first black man to have his hair turned white from being scared to death. After hearing my answer, my friends turned and looked at one another, saying the exact same thing I had, minus the part of being black. At that point, we all turned around and headed back to the car, never once having physically stepped foot into the old rundown haunted mansion. To this very day, I'm unaware if any of my friends ever went back to Lake Malone to the haunted house that had magically appeared the day before. But I'm more than sure that there have been many others who have sought after and perhaps even discovered the haunted house, and possibly even meeting their fate while doing so. So, a word of advice. If you're ever in that area and you decide to take a stroll through the woods and just happen by chance to run into an old rundown house that's out in the middle of nowhere, think twice before entering it, or you too might find yourself in the same situation that the unfortunate kid did many years ago, scared out of your mind so horribly that your hair turned solid white and your eyes nearly popped out of your head, then becoming the next urban legend of the haunted house of Lake Malone. I'm Sir Creepster, and until next time, stay terrified. Ha 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 ha!